Speaker Pelosi is still clutching the articles of impeachment, but her colleagues on the other side of the aisle aren't having it. Republican Bradley Byrne introduced a resolution to censure the speaker. The drama over impeachment isn't stopping anytime soon. But on today's show, some Republican senators aren't seeing eye to eye with the president on Iran. Speaking of Trump, his campaign is busy targeting undecided women voters. And Hill reporter Max Greenwood tells us the top 5 senators on the chopping block. I'm Jamal Simmons. Here's why you should care. Republican Senator Mike Lee broke from Trump following a classified briefing on Iran that happened Wednesday afternoon.
The briefing lasted only 75 minutes, whereupon our briefers left. This, however, is not the biggest problem I have with the briefing, which I would add was probably the worst briefing I've seen, at least on a military issue, in the 9 years I've served in the United States Senate.
White House and administration officials addressed the full Congress behind closed doors, which Lee says was uninformative and, quote, un-American.
To come in and tell us that we can't debate and discuss the appropriateness of military intervention against Iran. It's un-American, it's unconstitutional, and it's wrong. That was insulting. That was demeaning to the process ordained by the Constitution.
Lee also said that he now plans to vote for Democratic Senator Tim Kaine's War Powers resolution. That would require President Trump to go through Congress before engaging in conflict with Iran again. Another Republican who's been critical of the administration's actions with regard to Iran, Senator Rand Paul. Senator Paul debunked the administration's position that a 2002 war authorization gave the White House carte blanche to engage militarily.
They have justified the killing of an Iranian general as being something that Congress gave them permission to do in 2002. That is absurd. That's an insult.
Why you should care. For years, Congress has let presidents accumulate more and more power to make national security and warlike decisions. The truth is, many members of Congress in both parties don't want the smoke that comes from having their fingerprints on these life and death calls, just in case something goes wrong. They'd rather be able to complain or criticize later. But that makes for bad policymaking. The founders gave Congress war-making power for a reason. They are the people's representatives. And if the country is going to war, everybody should be in the game and at political risk. You want to limit the president from getting into more suspect fights? Elect more members of Congress with more backbone. While Democrats are taking jabs at one another, Team GOP is using data to target voters for the next election. According to Impact 2020, Republican campaign officials are setting their sights on a vulnerable voting bloc, non-college educated white women. The group heavily favored Donald Trump in 2016 by 27 points, according to exit poll data, but research suggests that this group of voters are shifting away from the commander-in-chief. In the 2018 midterm elections, non-college educated white women voted Republican by 13 points. And in recent months, the polling data shows they've been warming to impeaching and removing the president from the White House over Ukraine. So how is Team Trump trying to win back these voters? Last year, the campaign launched its Women for Trump group, and they reported it's grown 30,000 members ever since. Out of all the campaign events targeting individual subgroups like veterans, Latinos, evangelical Christians, and African Americans, 63% have been held for women alone. And the RNC is planning to host Women Empowerment Days in various states across the United States in hopes of engaging women voters. But is this working? Though there have been some signs of trouble, support looks consistent, at least among all women voters nationally. In our last Hill-Harris X poll, Trump approval numbers showed 40% support from women nationally. Here's why you should care. McClatchy reports that Trump 2020 and the RNC are both using what's called designated market area research to define communities in the U.S. that are vulnerable for his re-election chances. While most of the Democratic candidates are targeting each other, you know who's spending millions of dollars targeting Trump in general election states? Michael Bloomberg. The country is focused on the 2020 presidential election, but the fight for the United States Senate is being waged just below the radar. Joining us to talk about his article on thehill.com today, focused on the most vulnerable U.S. Senate seats, is Max Greenwood from the Hill's political desk. Thanks for joining us, Max.
Thanks, Jamal.
All right, so you got the lowdown on all these Senate seats. Tell me what you found.
Yeah, so I think there's, of course, about 24 Republicans or Republican-held seats up for re-election in 2020, but we kind of narrowed those down to the five most competitive.
Now, the issue here is for Democrats to take over the Senate, they need to win 4 seats or 3 seats plus the presidency, which gives the vice president the tiebreaker.
Exactly.
Right? Okay.
Exactly. So that's not a huge, a huge obstacle to overcome, but there's some challenges there. So out of that, out of the 5 most competitive seats that we're looking at here, 4 of those are held by Republicans. But the most competitive seat, that we're looking at is Doug Jones in Alabama. If you remember, Doug Jones won a special election in 2017. He was running against Roy Moore, very embattled candidate.
Accused of being a pedophile. I mean, it's like the worst kind of negative output you could get.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that really helped push Doug Jones over that margin that he needed. So he narrowly won in 2017. But here we are in 2020. You have a handful of Republicans looking to get him out of there, including Jeff Sessions, his predecessor in that seat, former Attorney General, who kind of right now looks like the favorite to win the nomination and to go after Jones.
Is there any scenario where Jeff Sessions is not the Republican nominee?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's still a competitive race. Sessions is up there. He has high name recognition, but I'd say his top challenger right now is actually Tommy Tuberville. He's the former Auburn University football coach. And this is Alabama. Football is a big thing.
Yeah.
So that actually goes a long way, and he's polling relatively well.
And do we know whether the president will come down in this Republican primary, or do we think he'll pick a side, considering he and Sessions have kind of a troubled relationship?
I think him and Sessions have obviously had a really turbulent relationship. The president has not hesitated to criticize Sessions, especially when he was Attorney General. But who knows how he's going to come down here? He might hold off until they actually have a nominee, and he'll back the eventual nominee, I'm sure. But until then, I wouldn't anticipate anything, coming from the president in the immediate future.
Okay, the other seats that I see you focus on, we'll try to get to all of them, but we hear about these a lot as people are trying to figure out the impeachment votes and where people may fall down on some of these procedural matters. Cory Gardner from Colorado and Susan Collins from Maine are 2 names that come up a lot as being very embattled Republicans who might do something interesting from the Democrats' perspective on these impeachment questions. How do you see their races shaking out in Colorado and Maine?
Well, I think Cory Gardner is by far the most vulnerable Republican out there. He's going to have a challenge most likely from John Hickenlooper, the former governor, still very popular in the state, has raised a lot of money. And Gardner is really running for re-election in a state that has just perpetually shifted to the left in recent years. If you look back to 2018, Democrats picked up, all 5 statewide offices and the state legislature for the first time in 80 years, I think, since 1936.
Wow.
So clearly there is this movement to the left, and at the same time, Gardner is just finishing out his first term. He was elected in 2014 on kind of that anti-Obama Tea Party wave. But whether that holds up in 2020, I'm just not so sure.
And in a state like Colorado, Obama might be looking a lot better these days than he did in 2014.
Exactly.
And Susan Collins in Maine. Democrats have been pining for this seat, it seems like as long as I've been alive. So is she in any real jeopardy?
I think it's too soon to tell. She only really announced that she was running for re-election about a month ago. So that's kind of been up in the air for a while. But you're right, Democrats have been wanting to go after her ever since 2018 and the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court vote. And if you recall, she, after raising a few questions, eventually came out in support of Kavanaugh as he faced allegations of sexual assault back in high school. So, she is this almost boogeyman to Democrats right now, and they want to take her out. But, the thing I'll note is I've talked to people in Maine who tell me that no one is as good as going up to, northern Maine, up Maine, and talking to those voters and campaigning up there as Susan Collins is. So she has a strong political brand in the state. And polls are still looking like they're in her favor. She's got a tough challenger. She's got, Sarah Gideon's running for that seat as well as a few other Democrats. But, right now, it's going to depend how that primary shakes out. But Susan Collins is certainly in for a tough race, but, far from gone.
I think about somebody like the senator from Missouri, Senator McCaskill.
Mm-hmm.
She was also known to be really good at talking to people across the state of Missouri, but she ran in a bad year in Missouri. She really got taken down. Okay, the two other people who are on your list here that we want to get to are Tom Tillis in North Carolina and Martha McSally in Arizona. And I think about it, McSally, because McSally didn't win that seat. She got appointed to that seat, which is very often not a great recipe for holding on to a Senate seat.
No, it's something of a consolation prize. So 2018, she loses to Kirsten Sinema. She, about a month later, was appointed by Doug Ducey to fill John McCain's Senate seat. And there has been a feeling in the Republican Party for a while that she's not an ideal candidate. That being said, they're backing her 100%. They'd much rather her win than her Democratic opponent, Mark Kelly. But, she is a little bit of a shaky politician. She has shifted to the right over the past couple of years. She's doing everything she can to hold on to that seat. But Mark Kelly is kind of a known brand in Arizona and elsewhere. He's a former astronaut, which never really a bad look.
Yeah, not many people can say that.
And he's the husband of Gabrielle Gifford,
right.
The congresswoman that was nearly killed 10 years ago or so.
Sure.
So that's really raised his profile, but he's running as this moderate, this centrist that can appeal to independents in Arizona.
No, I'm very interested because of what if, let's say, for instance, Bernie Sanders becomes the Democratic nominee. What does Mark Kelly do with Bernie Sanders in Arizona? It'd be very interesting to see how the two of them figure out how to campaign together in a state like Arizona.
Well, I think that's the big question for a lot of these Democrats that are running down ballot. If the nominee is a Bernie Sanders or even an Elizabeth Warren, a candidate that has staked out really progressive positions on healthcare, on entitlement programs, on foreign policy. What do you do if you're running as a compromise-minded centrist Democrat in these important swing states in North Carolina, in Arizona, in Texas?
We're out of time, but let's just tick off a couple of the wild cards that might be out there. Okay. I think you mentioned Michigan. Gary Peters.
Sure.
What other states do you think?
Yeah, so I think Gary Peters in Michigan, clearly, and I think the other big question here is going to be the open Senate seat in Kansas. Pat Robertson is retiring, and
Pat Roberts,
thank you.
Okay.
is retiring, and Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, punted on a Senate bid. So it's unclear who the Republican's going to be.
My one wild card I'll add to your list, South Carolina, the Lindsey Graham seat.
Jamie Harrison.
Only because Jamie Harrison is breaking records in fundraising every quarter. And if Lindsey Graham is clearly nervous about something because he is hugging Donald Trump as tightly as he possibly can. So Jamie may not be able to actually overtake Graham in that seat, but it does feel like Graham is scared of something. He's running like he really needs every vote he can get.
Jamie Harrison's a strong candidate, good fundraiser, great speaker. I've met him on several occasions, and he's a very nice man. That being said, Graham's been in there for a long time. He's also a known quantity in the state. And South Carolina is still a red state. It's not shifting to the left in the same way that North Carolina or even Georgia is. So I think it's a great wild card. I'm curious to see what happens, and I love watching those southern races.
All right. Thanks for joining us, Max.
Thanks, Jamal.
Okay. Thanks for watching Hill TV on YouTube. Be sure to click subscribe and hit the bell so you know when we post new videos. And head to thehill.com for all the latest political news.